Hey there guys, so Aliexpress right now is having their Choice Day sale that's going on until September 6th. And while I was just browsing on there to see some mini PCs, I ended up stumbling across this, which seems to be the most insane value mini PC that I've ever seen. It's this Firebat A6. Now I don't own this mini PC, I haven't tried it yet, so this isn't a direct endorsement of it. I did literally just buy it right now because this seems like a crazy deal, but I'm not going to be getting it in until after the sale ends. So if you're interested in picking this up, you can check out the link down below. But again, I haven't tried it yet, but I did place an order for it. But at $240, the Firebat A6 is an insane value because this is a Ryzen 7 6800H mini PC with 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD for $240. And with the sale going on right now, you can use up to an $18 off coupon for this system. So that means that for around $220 before tax, you can get a Ryzen 7 6800H mini PC. That is ridiculous value for money. The exact same mini PC from Amazon is currently selling for $285, which is still one of the best value mini PCs on the market. But at $220, it pretty much clears any competition that it has. Almost any other system with this hardware would end up costing over $300, and we're closer to $200 here than we even are to $250, again with that coupon. So on Amazon, you are not going to find anything that is going to be anywhere near as good a value as this. Now again, I have not tried this system, but I do have some experience with a Firebat system, that being this specific unit right here with a Ryzen 5 6600H. Now this one is sold out, but at $226, this is still a very good value, especially because systems with similar hardware to this are at a more expensive price. But for the same exact price as this system, which I liked, the A6 is providing you with double the GPU core count and 2 extra cores and 4 extra threads on the CPU. That's tough to beat. Now, one of the downsides is, of course, that you have 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD. Not exactly spectacular, but you are saving a lot of money going down this route. And if you don't need more than 16 gigabytes of RAM, or you already have an SSD laying around that you can swap in there, then this just has a lot more value. And like I said, you are not going to find anything on Amazon that is anywhere near as good a value as this thing is. And from the reviews that it seems to have on AliExpress, people do seem to be happy with it. And if you check out the reviews for it on Amazon, there's not a ton of them, but they all seem to be positive. Of course, there are some downsides to going with this specific unit over other options. More specifically, the IO isn't incredible. You know, you have your standard assortments of USBs, but you're not really getting more than one front-facing USB Type-C. You only get one Ethernet port, and it's gigabit Ethernet. At least they don't really make any mention of how fast the port is, so I'm assuming that this is just gigabit. But again, I'll have to test all of that out when I get the system in. Now, of course, I don't have this system in front of me right now, but I do have another system that has the Ryzen 7 6800H. So we can see real quick what the performance is going to be like with this in a scenario where it isn't so choked that it is downclocking itself. So immediately, one of the biggest benefits is that you're able to play a game like Counter-Strike 2. Now, yes, this is at the lowest in-game graphics settings, but with these settings, the 680M is a far more capable gaming experience than most other mini PCs at this price range. In fact, at the full 1080p resolution, without having to rely on anything like FSR, you are going to be able to have a high refresh rate gaming experience. And that's just something you're not going to be able to find in the sub $250 price range. You'd have to step up all the way up to over $300 to get comparable levels of performance. Now, I'm not going to say that this system is going to be perfect for every single game out there, but a title like Rainbow Six Siege X that just recently got an update that enhanced the graphics for it, well, at the low graphics settings with FSR set to balance, the FPS average that we get here is pretty great, considering that we're just barely able to squeeze out a triple-digit FPS average. And more importantly, the frame time charts are very smooth and consistent, and for a title like this is really what you want to see. It doesn't really matter if you could hit an FPS average of 100 if your 1% lows are dipping down into the 60s or below that, which you can tell by the frame time charts that is just not the case. Our 1% lows and FPS average are very close to each other, which is the most ideal scenario. But really, where I think a system like this thrives is in older titles or indie titles. Things like Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord run really remarkably well on here. This is at the low graphics settings, but with the 680M, you do have the capability to bump things up to medium if you're willing to sacrifice having a high refresh rate experience. And this isn't even the lowest that you can go in terms of graphics settings, though there is a pretty massive jump in terms of visuals when you go from low to medium. You do have the flexibility of either choosing a high refresh rate gaming experience with some visual sacrifices, or getting a close to 60 FPS average but with a massive leap in terms of visual quality. And that's just something you're not going to find at this price point from any other system. I think a perfect example of what these types of systems are great for is maxing out older titles. Here we have BioShock Infinite running with the maxed out ultra graphics settings, and we have the diffused depth of field effect enabled. This is a very, very demanding benchmark. That diffused depth of field is such a graphically intensive workload that a lot of the times APUs aren't really able to do it properly. You can get great performance out of this game if you just go down to the very high graphics settings, but maxed out ultra can still be pretty demanding on APU based systems and lower end graphics cards. So the fact that we're able to max things out here at 1080p and still get a pretty great result, though it is not a 60 FPS average, it's the best result you're going to get with any mini PC at this price range again. So as you see from those benchmarks, it is a pretty great result overall, especially at the price point that it's at. Again, there's nothing that can compete with it in this price point. You know, if I go onto Amazon and I try to find a system that is comparable to this thing at all, like just competing in the same price range, I really can't find anything that is even remotely near this level of performance. Most of the systems that I'm finding within a similar price range are looking at Ryzen 7 5700Us. We got a Ryzen 5 5600 for $210, which again, we're looking at the original Zen 3 with the 5600H, or with Zen 2 if we're looking at the 5700U, and both of those have Vega graphics. So we're going from Vega to RDNA if we just go with the Firebat. And it again just continues to be more of the same as we scroll through Amazon. You know, even Firebat themselves have other mini PCs that are on sale. You know, for example, they have this $205 Firebat AM02. That's 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512 gigabyte SSD with a Ryzen 5 6600H. And that would not be a bad price at all if this didn't exist, because for an extra $20 over this, you're getting, again, twice as many GPU cores, 2 extra CPU cores with 4 extra threads. That's a pretty massive upgrade, and there's no way that with $20 you're going to get a better uplift. This would have to be a horrific chassis for this to be a problem at all. We would need the APU in here to start choking so much that it starts to downclock itself significantly to make it a worse value. Of course, it could also be a very loud system, but if this is something that you're interested in getting, you can pick it up for a ridiculously cheap price. And the good thing is that with Aliexpress, you do get free returns. You know, you get 90 days to return this. So if it has any issues within the first 3 months of owning it, just ship that thing back. This, for the value that you're getting, does not seem like a bad purchase. I pretty much ended up instantly buying one of these just because I wanted to really see if there's this much value. So if you're interested in checking it out, check out the link down below. In terms of other mini PCs that are on sale, there are some that are pretty good prices, but this just blows everything out of the water that it's hard to recommend anything else. That said, I would like to ask that if anybody has any experience at all with this Gen Machine mini PC, I would love to know. This is a system with a Ryzen 9 7940HS, and what's interesting is that it has a soldered on RAM. So it comes with 32 gigabytes of RAM. You can get it bare bones with no SSD, but it of course comes with the RAM already installed. And what's interesting about this unit is that it has LPDDR5 RAM running at 6400 megahertz. So that is faster than the RAM that you'll normally find on most mini PCs that have the Ryzen 9 7940HS and all the derivatives of that, because when it comes to SODIMM memory, that caps at 5600 megahertz. So this in theory should boost the GPU performance as long as this thing is able to stay cool. So I'm curious if anybody has tried this. I'm kind of tempted to pick it up, but at $607 it just does not seem as good of a value. This really is more of a curiosity on my part. So again, if you have any experience with this thing, let me know down below. I would love to know whether or not it's worth picking it up. But I will link the FireBat A6 down below. Check it out. I don't know how many of these they have in stock. I don't know if this is going to last very long. You know, the sale is supposed to go on until September 6th, but a deal like this, unless they have crazy inventory, I don't know how they're going to keep this thing in stock. You know, if you have been considering a mini PC at the $200, or even if you're all the way down to $170 that you've kind of just set as your cap, spending an extra $50 to get this much of an uplift is insane. I'll close this out by showing you some comparisons of this running next to a 5700U and a 6600H, just so that you have some kind of basis for how much of a leap this is in terms of performance. But anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one. So jumping into Counter-Strike 2, we can see what the difference is between the 6800H and the 6600H and 5700U. All of these systems are roughly around the same price point, but you can see that the 6800H is getting noticeably better performance, especially in comparison to the 5700U. The 6600H is able to keep up pretty well here with an FPS average that is almost in the triple digits, but the 1% lows falling below 60 is not the most ideal scenario. Really, this 6800H seems to be the only one of these systems that is able to truly get a proper experience for this game. And this of course continues on into Rainbow Six Siege X, where you can see that at the lowest in-game graphics settings and FSR at balanced, the 6800H is able to get an FPS average of 100 with 1% lows of 83, so very, very close 1% lows and FPS average. Meanwhile, the 6600H is giving you an above 60 FPS average, though the 1% lows do drop slightly below that. Both of those systems are really going to be a great experience either way, but there is a pretty massive gap between the two. And then of course the 5700U is just not able to keep up here with an FPS average that is below 60 and 1% lows that are at 47. This is not ideal at all for this type of game, and realistically you're going to be forced to turn things down even more if you want to get a playable experience on the 5700U. And this trend continues along into Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, where again the 6800H is taking a commanding lead over both of the other systems with an FPS average that is almost at 100, 1% lows that are comfortably above 60, and you do have the added option of being able to bump up the graphics if you want to. Meanwhile, the 6600H just is not able to really do the same. It gets a great result at the low graphics settings, but if you bump things up to medium, you're going to be consistently below 60 to the point where it's not going to be an ideal experience, but you are still going to get a playable experience at the low graphics settings. And the same can even be said about the 5700U, where while it doesn't hit a 60 FPS average, it's close enough. And for this type of game, you're going to be able to play it like this, but again, you don't really have any headroom to move past this, and in fact, you are likely going to want to just lower it down to the very low graphics settings to try to squeeze out the last little bit of performance that you can out of this. And well, as I mentioned with BioShock Infinite, if you enable the ultra graphics settings and the diffuse depth of field, it becomes a very, very demanding benchmark. And you can see here that the only system that is providing a decent experience in it is the 6800H. While it's not above 60, it still gives you a pretty great result with an FPS average of 54 and 1% lows of 38. What's funny is that there's a trend happening here where as we go down in performance for each of these systems, the FPS average of the next system was the 1% lows of the previous, because the 6600H only ends up getting an FPS average of 38 with 1% lows of 31. So its FPS average was the 1% lows of the 6800H. And the same applies for the 5700U, where it gets an FPS average of 32, very close to the 31 of the 6600H and a 1% low of 23. Now, all of these systems can get to a playable state in this title, but you're going to have to make some sacrifices in terms of the visual quality. And if I'm being honest, the diffused depth of field is not worth the performance sacrifice here, but it does show that the 6800H is going to get a better experience here.